Dr. Shimon Ohayon was born in Morocco and immigrated to Israel with his family in 1956. He's currently the director of the Dahan Center at Bar Ilan University, which focuses on celebrating the unique and distinct heritages that form the Jewish narrative. While serving in the Knesset, it was he that introduced the legislation that led to November 30th being commemorated as the date to mark the departure and expulsion of Jews from Arab countries and Iran. Welcome, Dr. Ohayon, and thank you for joining us.
Shalom. Good evening here in Israel. I don't know. By you, I think it's good morning. Yeah.
Right. Well,
okay,
we can say both.
We can say both. Okay. Erev Tov and Boker Tov. First, I want to thank all the organizers for this special relay event, especially Mr. Jason, Dr. Drora Arusi, and others that I have seen. I'm not familiar with them. I had the privilege to work with Mr. Jason and Dr. Drora Arusi, and I'm glad to be here with you. I just came also for a special meeting by the house of the President of the State of Israel, in which we dedicate now a special event to commemorate this day, November 30th, or that especially was after Kaftet Ben-November. And I want to go through a few words that I prepared for this meeting. Before the UN resolution on the foundation of the State of Israel on November 29th, 1947. As a matter of fact, in the middle of the discussion, the Egyptian emissary to the UN, Hassanin Haikel, rose up stating that all Jewish communities in Arab countries would pay the price and suffer greatly in the event of such a resolution. And indeed, to our sorrow, his prophecy came true. And with this decision, Jews in Arab countries suffered attacks and pogroms, as we know. Riots took place in all Arab countries. And we will mention especially the communities that suffered prolonged events. And the same year, 1947, violent attacks erupted against the Jews in Haleb, Syria. 75 Jews were murdered and hundreds were injured. Half of the Jewish community fled the city of Haleb. The same thing happened in Lebanon in attacks on the Jewish community in 1948, which followed previous attacks in November 1945 in Tripoli. This went on for years in Lebanon, where a relatively small Jewish community lived. Moving on to Jews in Iraq, they experienced as early as 1941 a well-known Farhud that resulted in 180 Jews murdered and 240 injured. 600 businesses were robbed and 100 houses were destroyed. With the founding of the State of Israel, the government of Iraq passed a law allowing Jews to leave the country if they relinquished, gave up, in a matter of fact, their citizenship. Of course, as non-citizens, all of their property was seized by the Iraqi government. The same thing happened in Libya. In 1945, 130 Jews were murdered, hundreds were hurt, and 400 lost their homes. Over the years, the government of Libya declared that the Jews must temporarily leave Libya and could take no more than $50 worth of property. Thus, most of their property was left behind in Libya. This train of events recurred from country to another country. In Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, and more, the Jewish communities that all of them suffered from terrible events that left no hope for continuing to live there in security. The Arab League pressed Arab governments to prevent Jews from making Aliyah to Israel and to restrict their freedoms. In the end, nearly 1 million Jews fled these countries. 25 years after the UN resolution, the Jewish communities in Arab countries had in effect been obliterated. These Jewish communities had existed for 2,000 years, knew that, of course, that they knew times that were better or worse, periods of prosperity, and also periods of persecution, usually on a religious basis. 2,000 years of cultural, social, and spiritual activity, which contributed greatly to the people of Israel, ended in a brief period. The state of Israel received these Jews, and this was accompanied by economic, social, and cultural hardship. Essentially, these Jews experienced trauma from the time of their departure and eviction from the countries in which they had lived. Unfortunately, everything I have just said was unknown for many years in the Israeli society, and especially in the educational system. The fact that the story of Jews from Arab countries was unknown caused many of them to feel that they did not belong, even estranged from their surroundings, because the history of their communities was untold. And after all, we all shared the same hardships and the same fate, which caused the UN to decide on the founding of the State of Israel. It is this fate that brought about the attacks on the Jews in Arab countries. We can see how everything is intertwined. The question that troubled many is why we didn't hear really in our curriculum, especially in the schools, about all these events. It took the educational system a long time until it found inappropriate to address this issue in lessons on the history of the people of Israel. The lack of notice was across the board, related not only to the history, but also to the culture and art of these communities. Fortunately, many independent institutions documented and conserved their heritage. And thus today we can experience the first steps of more organized state support. With their arrival in Israel, great efforts were made by communal institutions and various organizations to conserve the rich and beautiful heritage that had existed in these communities outside of Israel. And indeed, Baruch Hashem, central institutions have been established, as well as active, flourishing museums, displaying the unique culture of each community and its contribution to the culture of the people of Israel. The educational system and other frameworks have gone through a long way that has forced them to recognize the cultural heritage of the former Jewish communities in Arab countries, and finally to integrate this recognition into the curricula of schools. The cultural prosperity of recent decades is expressed in a rich variety of activities, from the publication of books describing spiritual and cultural leaders in these communities, to the unique musical and artistic contribution of each and every community. Today, we can witness the participation of musicians and artists from these communities in mainstream cultural programs in the State of Israel. And there is a feeling of anticipation as important heritage is being unveiled. Many parts of these communities which lived on the margins of society for years are recovering and attaining a respected place in the cultural activity of the State of Israel. For example, the Inbal Theatre displays the special artistry of Yemenite dance, the establishment of orchestras such as the Andalusian and the Firkat al-Nur orchestras bring forth North African and Middle East heritage, respectively. The Abraham Accords, as well by establishing ties with the Arab and Muslim countries, give hope for significant renewal of cultural activity of former Jewish communities from Arab countries. I would like to mention in particular the recent cultural and academic ties that have been renewed between Morocco and Israel. All of this gives us hope that the wondrous heritage that was on the verge of oblivion, nearly disappearing from the Jewish and international landscape, will experience new life as it garners the attention of state institutions in Israel. Of course, that which recognize its uniqueness and can, of course, contribute to the development and to the integration into Israel's society. It was very, very surprising for many Israeli academic conference that was dedicated to the Hebrew law in Morocco. People could not believe that the fact that the Moroccan government established and supported a center for research center for the Hebrew law in Essaouira and Rabat, together with the University of Mohammed V in Rabat. So all these, and especially the Abraham Accords, will give us also a hope that something is starting to move, and the heritage of these Jewish countries, the Jewish communities from Arab countries, will really take the right place and the respected place in our culture in Israel and also in the Jewish world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ohayon, and thank you for helping with the Dahan Center to preserve that heritage and make sure that we all know it. Like you said, there's been cultural and academic programs through the Dahan Center, and we appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining us today.